Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into the Arabian desert, where the night air tastes faintly of dust and salt, and the moon hangs so low you'd swear you could knock on it. You've heard the rumor before, about a well that doesn't just reflect moonlight like any normal water, but actually drinks it in, swallowing the glow until the desert around it turns pitch black. Sounds romantic, right? Until you realize you probably won't survive this little moonlight hunt if you make one wrong turn out there. Sand doesn't forgive, and the desert's sense of humor is, well, let's just say it's not for beginners. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and the current time in the comments. I love knowing where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand on the edge of a small desert village, the kind where every building looks the same dusty beige, as if the sun painted everything in one bored afternoon. The moon's climbing higher, painting the sand in silver streaks, and a faint chill is settling over the ground. Somewhere beyond the dunes lies this well, the one they say swallows Moonlight whole, leaving travelers stumbling in sudden, unnatural darkness. Historians still argue whether this tale is just poetic nonsense from bored camel herders or some garbled echo of a real natural phenomenon, like how certain mineral-rich waters can glow faintly under specific conditions. The road is little more than a suggestion, a soft depression in the sand where countless footsteps, hoofprints, and cartwheels have passed over centuries. You walk past a row of market stalls that are already shutting down for the night. A man selling roasted chickpeas tosses you a handful with a grin that could mean welcome, or good luck. You'll need it. The air carries scents you can't quite name. Dates and cardamom, yes, but also something sharper, metallic, like coins kept in a damp pocket. Somewhere a goat bleats, unimpressed with your mission. That's fair. Goats have seen more failed treasure hunts than any historian. The moon hangs just above the horizon, its light so crisp that every ripple in the sand throws a tiny shadow. You can hear the faint hiss of wind curling between dunes, almost like breath. People say that if you follow that sound long enough, it leads you to the well, or maybe to a sand pit. The desert doesn't give refunds. There's a reason this story refuses to die. Even in dusty old texts from centuries ago, ones kept under lock and key in mosques and merchant libraries, there are passing mentions of a mouth in the earth that eats the sky. Quirky detail for you. In one 14th century manuscript, a bored scribe doodled little waves with teeth in the margin next to the description. Either he was taking the legend seriously, or medieval doodles were just as random as the ones in your high school notebooks. As you step beyond the last mud brick wall, the desert swallows the village sounds instantly. It's quieter out here, but not silent. The sand shifts underfoot with a whispering sound that makes you feel as though someone's pacing alongside you. Every so often you glance to the side, half expecting to see a shadow keeping pace, but the ground is empty, just silver ripples under moonlight. A shooting star blinks out over the horizon, so fast you barely catch it. Out here, the sky doesn't just feel big, it feels bottomless. That's the kind of sky under which a story like The Wells can survive for centuries, changing just enough with each telling to stay alive. Historians still argue whether its origin lies in pre-Islamic desert rites honoring the moon, or if it's just a story traders made up to keep travelers awake on long night journeys. Somewhere far ahead, the desert smells different. Cooler, sharper. You quicken your pace, boots sinking deeper into the sand. You imagine the well waiting for you, dark and thirsty, and can't tell if that thought makes you excited or uneasy. The path ahead isn't really a path anymore. more of a faint suggestion where the dunes slope in a certain way, as if agreeing to let you pass. The moon is higher now, washing the sand in pale light. But every so often a cloud drifts by and the world dims, just enough to make your heart beat a little faster. That's when you first hear them, the faint, overlapping voices of the caravan road. Not the people themselves, but the echoes. A jingling of metal harness rings, the occasional sharp bark of a camel that sounds equal parts offended and tired. Somewhere far off, a merchant calls a price in a language you only half recognize, the syllables stretching out into the night air until they dissolve into the sand. Historians still argue whether the caravan route you're walking dates back to the Nabateans, those same desert traders who carved Petra into pink rock, or if it's younger, a mere 1,000 years or so. In the desert, 1,000 years counts as yesterday. Soon, lantern light flickers ahead, swaying like a line of tiny stars on the ground. A real caravan is coming, their camels loaded with bundles wrapped in striped cloth. You step aside to let them pass, the camels' padded feet making a dull thump-thump in the sand. The traders don't stop. They barely glance at you, but the scents they carry linger in their wake. Cinnamon, dried apricots, and something faintly medicinal, like ground myrrh. The last man in the line slows enough to speak. "The well is ahead," he says, his accent thick and his voice low enough that you have to lean closer. "But it doesn't drink for everyone." Then he clicks his tongue at his camel and vanishes into the darkness behind you, a practical voice in your head. Possibly the same one that warned you against eating street food that time in Marrakesh. Tells you to turn back. But the desert ahead looks like it's waiting for you. The sand here is firmer, with pebbles scattered across it like forgotten coins. You stoop to pick one up and realize it's not a pebble at all, but a glassy chunk of something green. Desert glass, formed when lightning or a meteor strike melts the sand into strange, brittle shapes. Quirky fact? The Bedouins sometimes call these the moon's tears, and swear they fall when the moon is mourning. Whether she's mourning a lost love or a stolen drink, they never quite agree. You keep walking, and the horizon ripples in the heat that hasn't entirely left the sand. The dunes ahead are taller, their crests sharp as blades. Every now and then, the wind carves little ridges along their sides, and you imagine them as staircases for invisible travelers. You're not alone in this thought. There's an old folk belief that spirits, not people, built the tallest dunes as markers to guide themselves between worlds. Somewhere up ahead, the faint glow of another campfire flickers. You approach cautiously, but it's only 3 traders sitting in a loose circle, drinking tea so dark it might be coffee's shadow. They're deep in conversation, speaking about the well as if it's a person. She sleeps in winter. She swallows without chewing. She spits up what she doesn't like. They notice you listening, but instead of shooing you away, one of them pours you a cup of tea so sweet it makes your teeth ache instantly. "It's the sugar that keeps the sand out of your mouth," he says, deadpan. And you can't tell if he's joking. They don't tell you much. Traders rarely give away stories for free, but they leave you with one warning. If you hear the water before you see it, you are too late. You walk on, the taste of sugar lingering, and the moon feels heavier now, like it's leaning closer to see what you'll do next. The sand crunches under your boots, each step bringing you closer to whatever it is the desert's been guarding all these centuries. The desert begins to loosen its grip on you just enough to offer a gift, the faint, dark line of an oasis ahead. At first, it's nothing more than a smudge against the pale sand, but as you draw closer, you see the outlines of date palms swaying in the breeze, their fronds whispering in a language you almost understand. The air smells different here, cooler, sweeter, and your throat tightens in sudden thirst. You step between the palms, the sand underfoot shifting to a firmer, darker soil. The pool in the center is still, its surface reflecting the moon so perfectly that for a moment you feel as though you could fall upward into it. Beside the water sits an old woman on a woven mat, her back straight despite the years carved into her face. She's sorting through a basket of dried herbs, each movement slow and deliberate, like she's measuring time in pinches and sprigs. Without looking up, she says, "You walk toward the thirsty well." Her voice is neither question nor welcome. It's just a statement, the way someone might mention that the night is cold. Historians still argue whether the term thirsty well in old Bedouin tales meant a literal place or a poetic image for longing. Here, in the shifting half-light, it feels like both. She gestures for you to sit, and you do, grateful for the rest. She pours you a small clay cup of water from the pool, the liquid tasting faintly of minerals and dates. You notice the cup's rim is chipped, as if someone once bit it in a hurry. You're halfway through your drink when she begins her story. "The well is older than this sand," she says, fingers sifting through the herbs. "Older than the rivers that used to run here. Older than the first star that saw itself in its water." A small smile flickers at the corner of her mouth. Or, so my grandmother told me. You glance toward the pool. The moon's reflection wavers slightly as the breeze moves across the water's surface. The woman continues. "It is not a place for the impatient. Many have gone seeking it, thinking it is a gift. Few return, and those who do, return different." She tells you of one man who came back with hair gone white overnight, muttering in a tongue no one recognized. Another returned decades later, unchanged in age, though his children were grown and his wife had died. Historians still debate whether such stories were metaphors for exile or warnings to keep wanderers from straying too far, but the way she tells it makes you believe, if only for the length of a breath. A small, warm weight brushes your ankle. You look down to see a cat, thin, sand-colored, and with one torn ear, circling you with the confidence of a creature that owns the place. It sits between you and the woman, watching you with eyes so bright they seem to store their own light. "He knows the way," she says, almost offhandedly, as if that's not the kind of thing that could change the course of your night. You set your empty cup aside, but the woman's hand stills yours before you can rise. She offers you a strip of dried date, the sweetness a sharp contrast to the mineral tang of the water. "You will need your strength," she murmurs. Then, leaning closer, she adds, "And remember, do not try to drink if the moon hides her face." The cat darts ahead, slipping between the palms and into the silver-lit sand beyond. You follow, glancing back only once. The old woman is watching you, still seated on her mat, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The oasis behind you is already fading into shadow, as if it prefers to be forgotten by dawn. The cat moves like spilled mercury across the sand, weaving in and out of moonlit patches between the dunes. You try to keep pace, but the desert has its own ideas about speed. Each step sinks just enough to slow you. Each ridge of sand a little steeper than it looked from a distance. The night air is cooler now, yet the effort warms you. Beads of sweat trickling down your back beneath your shirt. It's then you hear it. A whisper. Not the wind, though the wind is never silent out here. This is softer, more pointed. You freeze, and the cat pauses ahead, its tail flicking once as if to say yes. I hear it too. The sound comes again, threading through the air. Your name. Drawn out slowly, as though the speaker is tasting each syllable. Historians still argue whether the so-called desert calls recorded in Bedouin lore were mirages of the ear, caused by shifting sand amplifying distant voices, or something less explainable. You tell yourself it's just echoes, perhaps from some night traveler beyond the next dune. But the way the sound dips and rises feels more intentional than accident. You follow the cat up a ridge, and as you crest it, the world changes. The wind dies suddenly, as if someone flipped a cosmic switch. The dune slopes downward into a shallow valley, the sand here darker and coarser, scattered with bits of bleached bone. Not human, at least. You hope not. But fragments of camel skulls, jackal jaws, and bird wings. A half-buried leather satchel juts from the sand, its strap worn smooth from years of wind polish. You brush the sand away to open it and find a bundle of brittle papers inside. Most are unreadable. The ink faded to nothing, but one sheet still holds faint script, a map without scale, showing a line of crescents leading to a black circle. In one corner, someone has scrawled in Arabic, "Do not follow the voice after the third call." You tuck it into your pocket without thinking. The cat leads you on, but the whispers return. Closer now, threading between your breaths. Your name again. And then, just for a moment, a laugh. It's the kind of laugh that's almost friendly, almost until you catch the edge of something sharp in it. Quirky tidbit. Bedouin guides used to tell children that the desert itself was alive, and it collected voices the way merchants collected coins. If the desert liked your voice, it would keep calling you back until you gave it what it wanted. The cat stops suddenly at the base of another dune, ears pinned back. Its eyes flash in the moonlight before it bolts up the slope, and you're left standing in the eerie stillness. That's when you notice the sand around your boots shifting. Not from wind, but as if something beneath it is slowly breathing. A gust of wind breaks the silence, and with it comes a sound you'd swear is applause, faint and mocking, rolling across the dunes. The cat appears at the ridge above you, tail high, clearly unimpressed by your hesitation. You scramble up after it, sand filling your shoes, your legs burning with each step. At the top, the whispers vanish. Below stretches an endless plain of low dunes, their edges softened by moonlight. Somewhere out there lies the well, but for the first time, you realize you're not entirely sure whether finding it will feel like a victory or a mistake. The plain below looks deceptively calm, the dunes gentle and rounded like sleeping beasts. You start down the slope, your boots sliding in the loose sand, and feel the desert's quiet sink into your bones. No wind now, no whispers, just your own breathing and the occasional crunch of a stray pebble underfoot. The cat trots ahead, its tail bobbing, the only moving thing in this still world. Half an hour later, you see them. Walls, or what's left of them. They rise from the sand in jagged pieces, edges crumbled like stale bread. You can tell they were once tall, maybe part of a city that sprawled across this plain long before the dunes claimed it. Historians still argue whether these ruins belong to Iram of the Pillars, the so-called Atlantis of the Sands, or if they were merely an unremarkable trading post swallowed by shifting terrain. The locals you've met seem to like the Atlantis theory better. More drama in it. You walk between what might have been streets. The sand has buried most doorways, leaving only the tops of arches visible. In one, a tangle of carved stone juts out, its patterns half erased by centuries of wind. You brush your fingers over it and feel the grooves, still sharp in places, tracing shapes of moons and waves. The connection to your quarry is obvious enough to make your skin prickle. The cat disappears around a corner, and when you follow, you find a collapsed courtyard, A single pillar remains standing, leaning slightly like it's had a long day. At its base lies a heap of broken pottery. You pick up a fragment and find that the inside is lined with something that catches the moonlight, a glaze of powdered quartz. Maybe, or something stranger. Quirky fact? Ancient Arabian potters sometimes mixed crushed desert glass into their glazes, believing it could catch the night and keep it in the vessel. The silence here feels heavier than in the open desert. Your footsteps echo faintly, and the sound bounces oddly, as if the ruins don't want you to hear yourself too clearly. You imagine scholars standing here centuries ago, debating the origins of the well. One theory might claim it was a collapsed cistern, another, a collapsed meteor crater. And in the middle of that heated discussion, someone would inevitably bring out the stories, how moonlight was drawn down into the water until the night itself seemed thinner. You notice something carved low into one of the remaining walls. Squatting. You clear away the sand and reveal a row of crescent shapes, each slightly different in tilt. It takes you a moment to realize they're showing the phases of the moon in sequence. The final carving isn't a crescent at all. It's a perfect circle, shaded deeply enough that it swallows shadow even in the moonlight. The cat reappears from a narrow gap between two leaning walls, its fur dusted with sand. It gives you a slow blink, then darts back into the ruins, forcing you to squeeze through after it. The passage opens into a small chamber that smells faintly of old fire. Black soot stains the walls in spirals, the kind you'd make if you dragged a torch around in a circle. In the center of the room lies a dry well, just a stone ring barely poking above the sand. You step closer, peer in, and see nothing but darkness. Not the kind of darkness that's just absence of light, but a thicker one, almost textured. For a moment you think you can feel it rising toward you, like cold breath. The cat meows sharply, the sound bouncing in the chamber like a snapped thread, and you step back without realizing you've done it. You don't linger. The ruins have given you enough hints, symbols, warnings. You emerge back into the moonlit plain with the distinct impression that whatever once lived here didn't leave willingly. The moon has climbed higher now, a perfect coin in the sky, and its light spills across the plain like a silver tide. You follow the cat toward a flicker of fire in the distance. It's faint, no more than a candle's worth at first, but it grows steadily until you see the glow of an actual camp. 3 figures sit around the fire, their faces half hidden by the hoods of their cloaks. They look up as you approach, eyes catching the firelight in quick flashes. One of them, a man with a beard streaked silver like desert frost, gestures for you to sit. You do, and the heat of the flames feels almost shocking after the cool air of the ruins. The man begins speaking before you can ask anything. The moon is strong tonight. The well will drink deeply. His voice is gravelly, the kind that sounds like it's been tested by years of sandstorms. The others remain silent, passing around a clay pot of something that smells faintly of rosewater and smoke. He tells you the story like it's a confession. Once, long ago, a prince lay dying, struck down by a fever no healer could cure. His father, desperate, sought a woman who knew the old ways, the ones people pretended to forget after newer laws came. She told him of the well that drank the moonlight, and how if he could catch some of that stolen light in a vessel of pure silver, it would heal the boy. Historians still argue whether such a tale came from real events or is just a dramatic layering of earlier myths. In some versions, the prince recovers. In others, the well's gift works only for a time before the illness returns. Worse than before. In this man's telling, the prince survived. But the cost was heavy. The king was required to replace what he had taken by giving the well a life in exchange for the one it had saved. That night, the king's most trusted general vanished, leaving behind only his boots by the palace gate. The man's voice lowers as he adds a detail you've never heard before. The moonlight in the silver flask was not like light you or I see. It moved inside the metal, slow and deliberate, like liquid mercury, and it had weight. When the king lifted it, the man says, it was as if he were holding a child. Quirky tidbit? In certain parts of the Gulf, fishermen once claimed that moonlight could be caught in shallow pools at low tide, and that it made the fish inside glow faintly for days. No one's ever proven it, but the idea of light as something you can scoop up still lingers in regional proverbs. The man finishes his tale and looks straight at you. The well does not just drink, it remembers. The silence after that is thick enough to feel. The other two by the fire have been watching you the whole time, unmoving. The cat sits between you and them, its ears twitching at every snap of the firewood. You thank the man, though you're not sure for what exactly. The story, the warning, or the strange comfort of company in the middle of nowhere. As you rise to leave, he gives you something small and cold, a coin, worn smooth except for the faint outline of a crescent moon. You will know when to spend it, he says, and then turns back to the fire. The cat is already walking away, tail curling like a question mark in the moonlight, and you follow without looking back. The glow of the campfire shrinks behind you, swallowed by the desert's patient darkness. The cat leads you away from the plain, toward a line of darker shapes on the horizon. At first they seem like low dunes, but as you get closer, you realize they're ridges of rock, weathered and cracked like the skin of some sleeping giant. The air here feels different, warmer somehow, and carries the faint smell of minerals, like old coins left in a hot pocket. You step between two of the ridges and find yourself in a narrow canyon. The moonlight barely reaches the floor, but it's enough to pick out markings on the walls. Some are obvious, ancient graffiti scratched into the stone, but others are painted in pigments so faded they're almost part of the rock itself. You trace your fingers over a spiral pattern that widens into a circle. Inside the circle, tiny lines radiate outward like beams of light. It reminds you of the carvings in the ruins, but here they're more elaborate, more purposeful. Historians still argue whether these desert petroglyphs are simple astronomy or coded instructions for rituals. Either way, they've survived millennia of wind and sun, clinging to these canyon walls like stubborn whispers. You duck under a low arch of rock and almost trip over something in the sand. It's a clay jar, lying on its side, half buried. When you lift it, you hear a soft clink, something inside. The jar is sealed with a hardened plug of resin. You debate opening it, but the cat lets out a sharp chirp and darts ahead. You set the jar back down. Maybe you'll regret that later. The canyon narrows again until you're forced to walk sideways. Here, the air grows cooler, and you catch the sound of dripping water, faint, irregular, like a clock with a faulty tick. It's surprising enough to make you stop. In a desert canyon, you don't expect water unless there's been a storm, and you've seen nothing but clear sky for days. You push forward and come into a wider chamber where a shallow pool glimmers in the moonlight, filtering through a crack above. The water is perfectly still, but you can see the reflection of the moon on its surface, sharp and bright. For a strange moment, you swear the moon's reflection is below the water, like it's a coin lying on the bottom. Quirky tidbit: in some ancient Arab desert camps, water sources were treated almost like people. They could be offended if approached with noise, or pleased if given offerings like flowers or bits of silver. It's easy to see why when you stand here, the place feeling more like a temple than a natural pool. The cat drinks briefly, then looks at you. eyes glinting. You kneel to touch the surface and find it colder than you expected, cold enough that your fingertips sting. You pull back quickly, half expecting frost to form, but the water remains still. That slow dripping sound continues, and you trace it to a crack in the far wall. The sound isn't from water falling into the pool. It's from water inside the rock, the kind of slow seep that suggests a deeper source. You wonder if this canyon is part of a much larger network, maybe even connected to the well itself? Historians still argue whether certain desert wells were fed by underground rivers, or if they were entirely rain-dependent. The truth is, no one can map every hidden channel beneath this sand. It's like the desert keeps its own veins secret. The cat moves toward the crack, sniffing. You follow, pressing your ear to the stone. At first you hear only the drip, but then a sound like a sigh. Not wind, not water, something in between. Your skin prickles. You step back, deciding you've pressed far enough for tonight. The cat agrees, darting back the way you came. As you retrace your steps through the canyon, you glance up at the moon and find it has climbed even higher. Its light sharper now, like it's watching everything you do. You leave the canyon behind, stepping back into the open desert where the sand seems paler now under the moon. The cat pads ahead, pausing every so often to glance back at you like it's making sure you haven't wandered off to chase your own thoughts. The air feels cooler here, but it's not an empty chill. It carries the faint scent of something green, something living. That's impossible. You think, out here, there's no reason for vegetation unless you're near a rare spring. But as you crest the next rise, you see it. A grove of palm trees huddled together like conspirators, their fronds shifting gently in the breeze. No oasis pool glistens between them, just sand and shadow. But you can hear the rustle of leaves like soft applause. You walk among the trees, noticing small woven charms dangling from some of the trunks. They're crude, bits of twine, seashells, and pieces of colored cloth, but each one seems carefully placed. In some Gulf traditions, such charms were meant to keep away the jinn of thirst, desert spirits who could make travelers hallucinate water that wasn't there. Whether or not you believe in that, you can't help but notice the grove feels observed. Historians still argue whether such palm groves were deliberately planted as waypoints, or if they simply grew around ancient, now buried wells. Either way, they became landmarks people spoke of in the same tone you'd use for an old friend who might still be alive somewhere. You run your fingers over one of the charms, and it hums slightly in the breeze. Just the wind, you tell yourself. The cat sits at the base of a tree, tail wrapped neatly, watching a patch of moonlight on the sand as if expecting it to move. Then you hear it, a faint, rhythmic pounding. At first you think it's your own pulse in your ears, but no, it's coming from deeper in the grove. You follow the sound, weaving between the trees, until you find an old wooden pestle leaning against a hollowed-out log. No one's there to use it, but the log is vibrating slightly, like something inside is alive. Quirky tidbit? In certain rural Arabian communities, there was once a belief that pestles and mortars left out under a full moon could catch moon blessings, which would make any food ground in them taste sweeter. That, or you'd accidentally invite in the wrong kind of spirit? No pressure. Oh, you crouch and touch the log. The vibration stops instantly, as though whatever caused it has frozen mid-motion. The grove falls silent. So silent you can hear the faint crunch of the cat's paws as it walks toward you. Then the pounding starts again. But now from a different direction. It's softer, more like a heartbeat. You turn and catch a flicker of something in the corner of your eye. Something pale slipping between the trees. Not moonlight, not shadow. Something in between. You follow, but it's fast, and the palms seem to rearrange themselves around you. The cat keeps up easily, but your feet sink deeper into the sand until you're practically wading through it. Just as you're about to give up, the grove opens into a small clearing. At its center is a stone well. No rope, no bucket, just the dark circle of its mouth. The pounding stops. The only sound now is your own breathing. You step closer, feeling the faintest breeze rise from the depths, carrying with it the scent of cool stone and something faintly metallic. The cat hops up onto the well's rim, peers down, then looks at you as if to say, "Your move." You lean over, and for a moment, the darkness below seems empty. Then, there it is, the moon's reflection, not on water, but suspended in the air like a coin caught halfway in a magician's trick. It tilts slightly, as though acknowledging your presence, and you feel the hair rise on your arms. You blink, and it's gone. Just blackness again. You stay leaning over the stone rim longer than you mean to, half expecting the reflection to return. But the well below stays dark, so deep that your eyes can't tell if there's water or just an endless shaft disappearing into the earth. The faint metallic scent still drifts up, mixing now with the resin smell from the canyon, as if the desert is reminding you of everywhere you've been tonight. The cat hops down and begins to circle the well, tail flicking. You follow its slow path, running your fingertips along the warm, weathered stones. Some of them are carved, not deeply, just shallow grooves that feel accidental until you notice they form repeating symbols. There's the spiral from the canyon again, and the circle with rays from the ruins. Historians still argue whether such symbols were a shared desert script or just a pattern people liked to repeat. Either way, they seem older than the grove itself, like the well was here long before the first palm sprouted. You kneel, pressing your ear to the stone. At first there's nothing. Then, from deep below, a single plop. Not the splash of a bucket, more like something falling into water from a great height. You lean closer, and for a heartbeat, you think you hear whispers. That's when the wind rises. It starts as a sigh, then grows into a steady draft up from the well. Your hair shifts, the palm fronds rattle, and the charms on the trunks clink together like soft wind chimes. You glance at the cat. It's crouched low, ears back, but not running, which is either comforting or deeply worrying. Quirky tidbit. In one old Hijazi folktale, wells were said to be the throats of the desert, and if you spoke into them during certain moon phases, they could answer. Not always in your language, but always with an answer. The tricky part, of course, was deciding whether you wanted to understand it. You decide not to speak. Instead, you take one of the dangling charms from a nearby palm, holding it over the well. It swings slowly in the breeze, and for a second, you think the shadow it casts is reaching down toward the darkness, like a hand searching for another hand. The wind drops as suddenly as it began. The silence that follows feels heavier than before. You replace the charm carefully, almost apologetically, and step back. The cat begins padding toward the edge of the grove, and you trail after it. The sand beyond is smoother now, almost polished by the wind, and stretches toward a ridge in the distance. You glance back at the well one last time, half expecting to see the moon's reflection hanging there again. But the stone rim is empty and still. As you walk, the ground changes underfoot, not loose sand anymore, but a harder, flatter surface. You crouch and find that it's worked stone, buried just beneath the desert's skin. You brush away more sand and reveal the edge of a wide slab, engraved with a shape you can't quite make out in the moonlight. It feels like the start of something much larger, maybe a plaza or a courtyard hidden beneath centuries of dust. Historians still argue whether the desert hides more lost cities than the sea hides shipwrecks. The difference is, The sand moves slower. It swallows things so gently you barely notice until they're gone. The ridge ahead grows taller as you approach. And now you can see that it's not just rock. It's the crumbled remains of walls, their outlines barely visible against the night. The cat disappears into a gap between them, and you follow, stepping into a place where the air seems cooler and the silence deeper. Somewhere beyond these ruins, you feel, lies the next piece of the Moonlight's trail. The gap between the walls funnels you into a narrow passage, just wide enough for you to brush both hands along its sides as you walk. The stone here is rough, pitted from wind and time, but you can still make out faint paint in sheltered spots, once bright red, now the color of dried pomegranates. A thin drift of sand lines the floor, and your footsteps sound strangely hollow, as if there's more empty space beneath than solid ground. The cat trots ahead, pausing now and then to glance over its shoulder. The moonlight slips in through cracks above, striping the walls in pale silver. You pass an archway whose keystone bears a carving of a crescent and, oddly, 3 dots beneath it. Historians still argue whether such marks represented phases of the moon or something more symbolic, like the 3 stars that appear before dawn in desert skies. You duck under a low lintel and step into a wide courtyard, its flagstones mostly buried under sand. At its center, a broken column leans at a precarious angle, casting a shadow like a sundial, though at night, it tells no time you can read. Around the courtyard's edges, low doorways gape into darkness. You get the feeling that whatever lived here was built to keep the outside world firmly outside. Quirky tidbit. In some ancient Arabian cities, people placed jars of milk in their courtyards on full moon nights, not for drinking, but as an offering to wandering spirits. The belief was that a spirit satisfied with such a gift wouldn't bother the household. The trick was remembering to take the jar away before sunrise, or you'd risk inviting it to stay. The cat darts into one of the dark doorways, and you follow, brushing past a hanging scrap of cloth that might once have been a curtain. Inside, the air feels cooler, almost damp, and you realize the floor slopes gently downward. Your footsteps echo softly now, and the sound bounces back in a way that suggests you're heading toward a larger chamber. Sure enough, the corridor widens into a circular room. The walls are lined with niches, each containing a single stone jar. Some have lids, others are open and filled with sand. In the center of the room is a shallow basin, empty except for a layer of fine dust. You kneel to brush it away and reveal a carved pattern, a swirl of lines converging into a single point. You've seen this before, in the canyon etchings and on the well's stones. It's the same spiral, only here it's far more detailed, with tiny markings branching off the main curve like rivers from a delta. Historians still argue whether these spirals mapped real places or served as symbolic representations of journeys. Either way, your eyes trace it automatically, following the curve until you reach the center. You half expect something to happen. A sound, a shift in the air, but nothing does. The cat sits by one of the jars, pawing at the lid until it slides aside. Inside is nothing but fine, pale sand. You scoop a little into your hand. It's cooler than the surrounding air, as if it remembers a night far older than this one. You let it slip through your fingers and watch it vanish into the dust on the floor. From somewhere deep in the ruins, you hear a faint tapping sound. It's slow, deliberate, and coming closer. You glance at the cat. It's staring toward the corridor, ears pricked, but doesn't seem frightened. Still, you both move quietly toward another doorway on the far side of the room. You step into a passage that curves upward, the tapping fading behind you. The air grows warmer again, and soon you can see moonlight spilling through a collapsed section of roof. You emerge onto what must have been a rooftop terrace. though now it's more rubble than structure. From here, the desert stretches in all directions. The palm grove a small, dark patch in the distance. And there, on the horizon, you spot it, a shimmer of silver, faint but steady. The moon's light seems to be pooling in one place, like water finding its way into a hidden basin. Whatever lies there, you think, is where the trail leads next. The cat meows once, as if confirming it. You pick your way down from the ruined terrace, using the moonlit shimmer on the horizon as your compass. The cat takes the lead, hopping lightly from stone to stone while you slide, shuffle, and occasionally mutter complaints at the rubble underfoot. The desert has that strange nighttime stillness now. No breeze, no rustle from the palm grove behind, just your own footsteps and the faint crunch of sand past the last crumbled wall. The ground changes again. The sand here is streaked with darker bands, almost like ripples left by an ancient tide. When you crouch to touch it, the grains feel heavier, denser, as if they've been sifted by centuries of wind. Quirky tidbit. Some Bedouin guides claim you can tell how old desert sand is by the song it makes when you walk on it. Old sand, they say. Sighs instead of crunching. You try stepping slowly. Sure enough, it's quieter, almost padded, like walking on powdered sugar. The silver shimmer ahead seems to grow with every step, though the land between you and it is not flat. Low ridges of rock rise like sleeping animals, and you find yourself weaving between them. Occasionally, your hand brushes a surface smooth enough to suggest it was once shaped by human tools. Historians still argue whether these ridges were natural outcroppings adapted by ancient builders, or the remains of walls buried up to their shoulders in shifting sand. The cat disappears over one such ridge, and when you follow, you nearly trip over what lies beyond, a stretch of ground paved in stone. The slabs tilted and cracked, but still mostly intact. In the moonlight, they gleam faintly, as though dusted with something metallic. You crouch, run your fingers over the surface, and feel the fine scoring of old chisel work. At the far end of the stone path, a narrow cleft opens between two high rock faces. The shimmer of light seems to pour directly into it, and for a second, you think you can hear the faint sound of dripping water. You step closer and realize the air is cooler here, carrying a scent you can't quite name. Something like wet stone mixed with crushed herbs. You glance up. The moon sits directly above the cleft, its light spilling down in a perfect beam. If you didn't know better, you'd think someone arranged the entire landscape to make this happen. Then again, ancient builders did have a knack for that. Historians still argue whether some desert structures were aligned with moonrise points on purpose, or if it's just a happy coincidence noticed much later. You slip into the cleft. The stone walls close on either side. Your shoulders almost brush them, and the beam of moonlight ahead feels like a path you could actually follow with your hands. The sound of water grows louder until you step into a small chamber, a natural hollow in the rock, no bigger than a living room. At its center is a pool. It's shallow, the water so clear you can see the stone bottom, but the surface reflects the moon as if it's a perfect mirror. The shimmer you saw from afar is here in full force, pouring into the pool and dancing across the rough walls. The cat sits by the edge, tail wrapped neatly around its paws. You kneel beside it, leaning over to see your reflection mingled with the moon's. For a moment, your face and the moon seem to overlap, and you wonder if the same thing happened to whoever first found this place centuries ago. Quirky tidbit. Some pre-Islamic poets wrote of moon drinking, a ritual where you'd scoop water reflecting the full moon and drink it to take in its wisdom. Whether it worked or not, you can't say, But the water here looks as though it might taste like secrets. You trail your fingertips in the pool. The surface ripples, distorting the moon into silver waves. When the ripples fade, you notice something strange. Beneath the reflection, deep in the water, is a darker shape. At first, you think it's a shadow of a rock, but then it shifts ever so slightly. The cat leans closer, ears forward, eyes fixed. You're not sure whether to stay or back away. The shape beneath the water holds still, as if waiting for you to decide what you are. Predator? Prey? Foolish traveler with curious fingers? You shift your weight back, planting your hands against the cool rock floor, and the cat flicks its tail in a lazy but deliberate arc. That tail, you're starting to realize, is a kind of punctuation. It ends sentences you didn't know were spoken. The moonbeam remains steady, feeding light into the pool until the surface looks almost solid. Then, without warning, the dark shape below stirs again, rising slowly. You lean forward despite yourself, the cool scent of the water sharp in your nose. What surfaces is not quite a person. Its face is half-formed, as though carved from moonlight and shadow in equal measure. Eyes like polished onyx regard you without blinking. Its mouth moves, and for a moment you think you hear words, but they slip sideways in your mind like water through cupped hands. Quirky tidbit. In certain Yemeni villages, there's an old superstition that if you whisper into a well on a full moon night, someone, not something, will whisper back, but in your mother's voice. You really hope that's not what's happening here. The figure's hand emerges next, dripping light as if the liquid clings to it. It reaches towards the edge where you kneel, stopping just short of touching your skin. The cat does not move. Its green eyes remain locked on the figures. Historians still argue whether early tales of water spirits in the Arabian Peninsula were independent traditions or imported from older Sumerian myths about beings who guarded life-giving springs. What's clear is that those tales always carried a warning. Never accept a gift from something that lives in the water unless you're willing to give something back. The figure tilts its head, as though measuring you against some invisible chart. Then it lets its hand drop back into the pool, and the ripples erase its features. Only the moon remains, undisturbed, watching from the surface. You glance at the cat. It stands, stretches in that slow, feline way that always looks like both a luxury and a challenge, then pads toward the narrow opening you entered through. You follow, but the moment you step out of the chamber, the air changes. Warmer now, with a faint breeze that smells faintly of date flowers. The path slopes downward, and you notice the shimmer is gone, hidden behind rock and shadow. Above, the moon has begun its slow drop toward the horizon. You realize suddenly that the pool will be dark soon, and whatever lived in it will be gone until the next full moon. You walk on, the cat leading you into a wider space between the rock ridges. Here, a scattering of low stone walls forms the ghost of a settlement, doorways with no doors, thresholds leading to nothing. You step over one and find yourself in a square room where a single carved niche remains in the wall. Inside the niche is something surprising. A small, stoppered jug, its clay pale and smooth as a shell. You pick it up. It's cool to the touch, and when you tilt it, you hear the faint slosh of liquid inside. Not much, maybe a mouthful. You wonder if this was left as an offering to the water spirit, or perhaps taken from it. Quirky tidbit. Archaeologists once uncovered a cache of sealed jars in the empty quarter that had been buried for over 1,000 years, and some still held traces of liquid. Most were just water, but a few contained a thick, sweet syrup likely made from dates and frankincense. Imagine finding ancient dessert. The cat jumps onto the low wall beside you, tail curling, and looks toward the east. The first hint of pale light is smudging the sky there. You realize dawn is coming, and you've somehow been walking through the night without feeling the hours pass. You tuck the jug into your bag without deciding why. Only that leaving it behind feels wrong. As you step back over the threshold, the wind stirs faintly, whispering through the ruins as though it remembers more than you ever could. Somewhere ahead, the well still waits. The ruins fade behind you, swallowed by the shifting dunes. The cat pads ahead, weaving between clusters of hardy desert shrubs whose leaves catch the moonlight like tiny shards of glass. You're beginning to feel the pull of exhaustion in your shoulders, but the landscape refuses to let you slow. The path ahead dips and rises as if deliberately keeping you awake. The sand here feels different underfoot, finer, almost silky. You remember reading once that in some parts of Oman, sand grains are so smooth they squeak when you walk across them. You try it now, and sure enough, the faintest squeak escapes each step. It's the kind of tiny, ridiculous thing that makes you grin in spite of yourself. Ahead, a faint sound drifts on the breeze. Not wind, not an animal, but something rhythmic. You quicken your pace and eventually crest a rise to see a figure standing alone beside a wooden frame. It takes you a moment to realize it's a centuries-old shaduf, a lever and bucket water-lifting device, still in perfect working order. The figure, dressed in a robe the color of burnished copper, works it with steady ease, lowering the bucket into a narrow, shadowed shaft. As you draw nearer, the figure turns, and you see her face is deeply lined, eyes bright as the desert stars above. She regards you for a moment, then gestures toward the well. "You're late," she says, as though this meeting had been set in stone for years. Quirky tidbit. In ancient Nabatean settlements, wells weren't just for water, they were used as message drop points. Clay tablets or folded parchment could be sealed in waterproof containers and lowered for others to retrieve. Safe from prying eyes, she tells you the well here is a cousin to the one you seek. It doesn't drink the moonlight, it lends it. Historians still argue, she adds with a wry smile, whether the moonlight ever truly belongs to the moon, or whether it was stolen long ago from the earth and only borrowed back each night. You help her draw up the bucket. The water gleams faintly, not like the shimmering pool you saw earlier, but with a subtle pearly glow that seems to breathe. She fills a clay cup and hands it to you. You hesitate, remembering the warnings about taking from wells. The cat rubs against your leg, purring as if to say, "What's the worst that could happen?" Which is not comforting at all. You drink. The taste is unlike anything else. Cool but not cold, sweet but not sugary. More than a flavor. It's a sensation, as if some small light has taken root in your chest. She nods. Now you can find it, before you can ask what she means. She turns back to the shaduf and begins lowering the bucket again. Her motions deliberate, almost ceremonial. You glance at the cat, but it's already walking away. And you realize the old woman isn't going to explain anything else. You follow, and soon the land changes again. Sand giving way to gravel, then to broad slabs of cracked limestone. The air feels lighter here, almost charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm. The moon, lower now, paints the rock in long, pale streaks. On one slab, you notice something odd. Faint carvings, not letters, but flowing shapes like waves and crescents. You kneel to trace them with your fingers. They're shallow, worn smooth by time, but still recognizable. You've seen similar patterns in museum photographs, stone markers used by nomadic tribes to mark sacred water sources. Some of them were thought to be over 3,000 years old. The cat waits ahead, sitting on the edge of a shallow depression. You step up beside it and see the first sign that you're close. A thin thread of water winding between the rocks, catching the last low angle of moonlight and carrying it forward like a ribbon. It vanishes under a lip of stone, and you know without being told, you're nearly there. You crouch beside that ribbon of water, feeling its cool breath rise from the crack in the stone. It's so narrow that even the cat has to angle its head to peer inside. The moonlight glints once, then again, as though the water is winking at you. You trail a finger along it, and the light clings to your skin for a heartbeat before fading. The crack widens into a shallow channel, leading you across the limestone like a silver path. You follow it, careful not to slip on the smoother patches where the water has polished the rock. The cat trots ahead, pausing at intervals to make sure you're still coming, then darting forward again. The channel dips and disappears beneath a low arch of stone. You have to kneel, then crawl, your shoulders brushing against rock on both sides. Cool droplets land on your neck from the ceiling above. Somewhere ahead, you hear the faintest trickle, not a gush, not a roar, but the measured pace of water that has been traveling for centuries and has no reason to hurry. When you emerge, you find yourself in a hollow, a natural basin carved into the limestone. The moonlight pools here in earnest, gathering across the water's surface as though someone had poured molten pearl into the basin. You take a step closer, and the surface ripples, not from wind, but from a slow, deep pulse beneath it, as though the basin itself is breathing. Historical fact: in the Arabian Peninsula, some ancient cisterns were deliberately left uncovered so the moon could see the water, a practice tied to both practical cooling and mystical beliefs about lunar purity. Archaeologists have even found inscriptions requesting the moon's blessing for the water's drinkers. At the far side of the basin, a single narrow spout channels the glowing water into yet another crack, sending it further underground. You realize this must be the last visible step before the well that drank the moonlight itself, where all of this light is gathered, swallowed, and stored. The cat sits at the basin's edge, tail curled around its paws. You kneel beside it, watching the light move in slow currents beneath the surface. You're tempted to lean over, to try and see deeper, but something holds you back. Maybe it's the memory of that first well, with its whispers. Maybe it's the way the light here feels alive. Quirky tidbit: in one obscure 14th century Yemeni manuscript, a traveler claimed he had poured a drop of this moonlit water onto a seed, and the plant that grew was so pale it glowed at night, except on the new moon, when it vanished entirely from sight. You sit with the basin a while longer, letting your eyes and mind grow heavy. The sound of the trickle, the gentle glow, and the steady, unhurried presence of the cat all start to blend into a single rhythm. The night air smells faintly of salt now, as though you're nearing the sea, though you know you're far from it. When you finally rise, the cat leads you to the outflow spout. You crouch and peer into the darkness where the glowing stream slips away. The space is just large enough to crawl through, and the limestone walls are damp and cold. The thought of sliding deeper into the earth should unnerve you, but instead, it feels like the only direction left to go. You take one last look at the basin, at the moonlight swaying gently in its stone cradle. Then you duck down and follow the cat into the narrow throat of the rock. The glow ahead already beginning to change, taking on a warmer, almost golden tone. You realize this light is no longer purely the moon's, it's something transformed, something the well has been preparing for you. The tunnel tightens around you, the glow spilling forward in slow, liquid ribbons that paint your hands and knees as you crawl. The rock here feels different, slicker, almost clay-like in patches, as if centuries of seepage have shaped it into something softer than stone. The cat moves without hesitation, a dark silhouette against the light, its tail curling lazily as if this were nothing more than a midnight stroll. The air grows cooler still, the kind of deep breath cold you only find far beneath the world's surface. Your ears pick up a low hum, not mechanical, not entirely natural, but somewhere between. It thrums faintly in your teeth, a vibration you can't place. Then the tunnel widens without warning, and you're standing on the lip of a vast underground chamber. The well that drank the moonlight lies at its heart, a circle of perfect darkness rimmed with a faint, golden shimmer. The glow you've been following doesn't come from above, but from within. The water here isn't merely lit. It is the light, pulsing upward like a heartbeat before fading back into shadow. Historical fact: deep desert wells were often protected not just by physical coverings, but by legal and spiritual guardianship. In parts of medieval Arabia, damaging a sacred well could result in banishment, a punishment far worse than death in such an unforgiving climate. You inch closer, the air thickening around you. Each step feels like moving through honey, a slow, resistant pull that urges caution. The cat stops at the edge and looks at you, not forward, not down, but at you, as if to confirm your readiness. Quirky tidbit: an obscure Persian folktale claims the moon once hid in a desert well to escape a jealous sun, and that wells still keep a fragment of her reflection for safekeeping. You kneel and look into the well. At first, you see only your own face, warped by the golden ripples. Then the image shifts. You see the moon as it was tonight, then as it was centuries ago, then as it will be centuries hence. Seas appear and vanish, shadows shift, craters smooth and deepen. The changes move faster until the surface becomes a blur of light and shadow. And finally, stillness. The cat's tail brushes your arm, grounding you. You realize the water has risen, just slightly, and the golden edge now laps at your fingertips. You dip your hand in, and the light clings to your skin, not like water, but like fine powder, soft and impossibly warm. It doesn't run off. Instead, it seeps inward, leaving your hand perfectly dry yet buzzing with some quiet, internal hum. Historians still argue whether places like this were born from nature or built by ancient hands. Standing here, you're not sure the distinction matters. The cat turns and pads back toward the tunnel, pausing just long enough to make it clear. The well has given what it meant to give. You take one last, slow look into that impossible depth, then follow. The climb out feels longer than the crawl in, but the light in your hand, and now, faintly, in your chest, guides each move. When you finally emerge into the basin above, the moon has slipped lower, and the glow in the water is fading. You step back onto the limestone, the cat beside you, and the desert night feels softer than before. You walk beneath the last silver breath of the moon, the desert stretching out like a dark sea around you. Each footstep seems quieter now, muffled by the sand as if the land itself is urging silence. The cat trots ahead, no longer in a hurry, tail held upright like a tiny flag in the starlight. The glow in your hand has dimmed to the faintest ember, just enough to notice when you glance down. It no longer hums, it simply rests there, content. You imagine it will fade entirely before dawn, returning to the well in some invisible way. But for now it is yours. The air carries a coolness that softens the sharp edges of the world. You breathe in, and it feels like the scent of the limestone, the faint salt from nowhere, and something sweeter still, like dates ripening in the dark. Above, the stars seem closer, clearer, each one holding its position as though they've been watching your path the whole time. Your steps slow until you're barely moving, letting the quiet stretch. Somewhere far off, a single night bird calls once, then again, then falls silent. The cat finally stops, turns to look at you, and sits. Its work, for now, complete. The sand beneath you is cool enough to sit on, so you lower yourself, resting your hands on the earth. You feel steady, anchored. The moonlight may have gone from the world above, but the desert has its own glow, hidden in its wells, its stones, its stories. Your eyelids grow heavier, each blink lasting longer than the last. You let the night wrap around you, the hum of the world settling into stillness, and drift quietly, without effort, into sleep.
you.